welcome. Welcome, everybody. This is Joel Harden. I am so happy to have you with us tonight and have so many fantastic guests with us tonight, which I'll get to in a moment. You're in the right place if you're at a town hall on the Civic Hospital development. We need to have an urgent conversation about this. But before we go too far, I'm broadcasting to you from our constituency office here at 109 Catherine Street, which sits on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin peoples. So I wanted to make sure we had a moment to reflect on that seriously. So I'm very honored that our good friend, Verna McGregor from the Kitigan-Zibi First Nation is with us. And Verna, I'd like to pass it over to you so we could start this town hall in a good way. And thank you so much, my friend, for being with us.
Oh, Joel. Hello, everybody. Welcome. I lit you a smudge tonight too as well because the site of a new great big healing lodge is so important. And it's also part of leadership is also looking after the needs of the collective. And that's our understanding too of if you were a chief or leader of the community. So again, too, as well, I think this is a great moving forward, really. And the location is so important too. And we had a tagline, it was called, here in the community with one of our projects, it was called Blending Tradition with Technology. And again, too, as well, I think the hospitals also are like a hub for wellness. And the location's important. And for us also, our understanding of also medicine and healing is also tied to the land, because you would say the word for medicine in Algonquin is mashkiki, and it comes from the word mashkauzuin, which means strength, and also from the aki is land, so it's strength from the land. So again, location's important, and I think too as well, they keep this in mind too, is how do you blend even the location of nature, because also nature is healing and for the good of the collective. So on that note, I'm just going to say a little opening prayer to honor our ancestors whose traditional lands also this hospital will be built on. And thank you, Joel, for the, they call this Nasema tobacco. And I have my smudge going to offer you good discussions tonight. So I say, miigwech kajemanido, onjeni kashkitucha mawanto, se koshe nongo mame kakina pumatsijik, we do kwa kakina mam de gay Joel Jinkazo, che wewen in Jimanjit non. Miigwech onje kakina kakishan dana, man de gain in the kimananchka, kikwejin kazon in the kimanan, we do kwa kakina pumatsijik, and is what koshe nongo. Miigwechonje kakina ete kishukon kizis tipikizis a chichinung shagwido kwanino kmisnan tipikizis onje nagdo wabdan kakina guchnipi miigwechonje nasewen kakimi jenchimino pamazion wido kwa kakina pamazi jik mam de geda shiakos a jik mamwe ya and COVID-19 miigwechonje ya ishkude kakimi jenchimino abchitoyan wido kwa ginin wagonje nagdo wabdan kakina guch Ishkude, miigwechonje kakina nijino and dogana, kakina, a wesizak, mitigoga, a sini, kakina guch. Shwen mishnon, hashich, kancheshquat negwede semen kego gajemana do, wido kwa kakina, mam de ge, we wisne jik, the magas a jik, akuz a jik, a shich kiwin, winabo jik, shwen mishnon, miya. Miigwech, 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 miigwech. Really quickly, I say thank you for allowing us to come together. Please guide Joel into this, and also Catherine, the co-chair, in their discussions tonight. And I just say thank you to the four elements on the medicine wheel, which includes the earth, the waters, the fire, the air that we breathe. And I ask that you guide our relatives well for the good of the collective. And I say miigwech, which is thank you. And I say it 4 times to honor the 4 directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 colors of people on this earth. And I wish you well, miigwech. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Verna. Miigwech indeed. S'il y a quelqu'un qui parle français dans notre atelier ce soir, on pouvait accommoder votre chance aujourd'hui pour parler dans votre langue de choix. Okay, I just was signaling to French language speakers that if in fact they want to speak tonight in any aspect of our breakout groups or open forum sessions, we will accommodate you. Verna, thank you so much for starting us off in a good way. It is always great to acknowledge that reconciliation is not just a slogan, it's a statement that we have to tie into everything we do. And mindful of the commitments our ancestors made when we wanted to try to live together on this land, I'm very honored, Verna, that you could join us. It means a lot. It means a lot to us. Thank you so much. So let's get started. I'm going to say a few things off the top and resist the need to editorialize, because I am very honored that we have a number of folks who are joining our conversation tonight that are going to help us understand this issue of the Civic Hospital development and why it's so important for us to ensure that there's transparency and accountability and smart, responsible development in the development of this key artery of our healthcare infrastructure in our city. I will just say this, I was struck in the 2018 provincial election at how many neighbors brought up this matter with me. How many neighbors had gotten involved in the National Capital Commission's consultation on where the new hospital should be located. Over 7,000 of you. And perhaps many people who are participating in our town hall tonight. And many of those folks at the doorstep in the years 2017 to 2018 told me explicitly they were frustrated that the Ottawa Hospital Board and leading decision makers in our city elected to not heed the advice of taking the hospital to Tunney's Pasture and instead decided to put it at Dow's Lake. And what we have learned since in May is that we could lose 524 trees at least from our urban tree canopy, which is essential in a climate emergency to maintain. Queen Juliana Park, which is a crown jewel for many of us who enjoy wandering and getting outside and getting into nature. So this is an urgent conversation. We have also learned that the prospect of a 2,500 car parking garage above ground, 4 stories, could be put in the place of Queen Juliana Park, right across from the UNESCO World Heritage Site. So not surprisingly, our inboxes here at the MPP office in Ottawa Centre have been flooded. We've read those emails, we've heard your calls, and we have been in conversation with all of you individually, but we thought it was important for us to summon a moment collectively, because as our speakers will show tonight, we are hurtling towards a deadline at the city on a decision, and we are hurtling towards a deadline at the National Capital Commission later on to make a decision. And we think it's important that you get to have your voice heard. And that's what we pledged to do tonight. We are going to have a collective platform. That's what the MPP office is to us. It's a place for the community to make sure their voice is heard and that responsible decisions are made. So with that, I'm going to pass the proverbial mic to my good friend, Catherine McKenney, who's the councillor for Somerset Ward, and someone who I'm sure has also heard a great deal about this development. Catherine, over to you.
Thanks, Joel. Thank you everyone for being here this evening. I know it's a beautiful evening out there, and we have, I think, just over 150 people joining us. And thank you, Verna. Anytime Verna opens up a meeting or any assembly that we have, I always feel like, you know, we're in good space. We're here together, and we want what's best for our communities and our public realm and the earth. So thank you, Verna. It means a lot to me anytime you open up one of our meetings. Civic Hospital development. I mean, could start off, and I will start off by saying it's in the wrong place. We all know that. It's should not be located at Queen Juliana Park. It would seem that it's that decision is not going to be reversed. And what are the, if you will, quote unquote, mitigating factors that we can introduce into our decision making? And like Joel said, and I'm sure you'll hear from Sean, we hear from our residents who we represent daily that there is just too much involved in this next decision that has not been addressed. Traffic impacts are one thing, and we'll deal with those traffic impacts. And we know that we cannot pit one community against another. It cannot be Sherwood versus Rochester. It cannot be Parkdale versus Preston. We have to ensure that we're moving forward in a way that that does not harm any one neighborhood. However, having said that, the loss of trees, as a city councillor for Somerset Ward, I have somebody come to me at least twice a week to tell me why trees need to be removed in the downtown. And there's always a good reason, so they think. And over 500 trees removed from this location cannot happen. We do not have the tree canopy that we need in the downtown to mitigate the effects of climate change today. We are not catching up to our tree loss, and we will never catch up to the loss of over 500 trees. A 4-story parking garage, parking for over 3,000 people, or 3,000 vehicles, really is a step backwards. I'm not sure that there's another city. We know that London, Ontario, their council just said no to a road expansion. And you heard right, London, Ontario said no to a road expansion, because cities are starting to realize that they have to move forward in terms of how they address climate change and our climate emergency. 4-story parking garage is a game stopper. It cannot be allowed. And then, of course, public transit. We have to ensure that people will take public transit, and having a pedestrian passover or a situation where people have to walk a long way that's not well lit or that's not close to where they're going, means that they won't take transit. So today we need to this evening, I thank Joel, I thank Sean, their offices, for organizing this evening's consultation, because we need to hear again from you. And I know that we've called on you time and time again to tell us what you're looking for. It's one thing for us to tell you what we're looking for, but it's another thing for council and the mayor to hear from you. So I thank you for that. I look forward to the conversation. I look forward to taking notes, and I look forward to bringing all of your concerns to the council table. That I'll hand it back over. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Thanks so much. I should have given people a bit of a roadmap for tonight. I apologize for that. So just so people know, because I'm sure folks want their voices heard too, and they will be. I'm going to be just introducing a couple more municipal colleagues, and Tone Dressen, who is a leading architect in the city, former president of the Ontario Association of Architects, is going to do a quick slide presentation which ties together the threads of this particular development, and then it will be an open Q&A period. For folks to weigh in, to tell us what you believe and what you think. Then what we're going to do, because sometimes discussions in the whole don't always let all the voices come to the fore, we're going to organize some breakout groups. So in smaller Zoom discussions, you can also have your voice heard. We're going to be taking assiduous notes through all of it. When we get to the breakout rooms, I'm going to be calling upon some help from some of you participants out there, so we can make sure that our conversations are documented. So there's a bit of a roadmap for you, just in case you were worried it was going to be folks like us in elected positions talking all night. Absolutely not. Important that you know where we're at. We want to hear from you. I want to, with that in mind, I want to pass the mic to my friend Sean Menard, Councillor for Capital Ward. Over to you, Sean.
Thanks so much, Joel. Really nice to be here with everybody, and very much appreciate the event tonight. It's really a marvel that as we look to build a cutting-edge 21st century hospital, we are relying on very much last century planning to do it. We know that there's been other sites selected, and Tunney's was obviously identified as the optimal location for the hospital with a consultation of 8,000 people. But it was switched without consultation or transparency to the John Carling site. And so we've been thinking about this proposal in two ways. One is this is not the right spot for the hospital, and we need to push back on those aspects and how that decision was made. And two, it's not ideal, but if there is a hospital rubber stamped here, we need to embark on a city planning process that fits the context of the site and the needs of the city and the future we want to see realized in our local neighborhoods. And so that means things like we can't have a 4-story parking garage in a beloved public park, even if they do green the poorly accessible top of it. We can't just cut down century-old trees, and we can't keep building for more car dependence in this area when we know the future of the city is increased transit use and active transportation. There are a lot of very, very large buildings going up in and around this site. And if you're just planning for more parking, you will congest this area even further. And so I think it's disappointing that we have to go through this. That, you know, these are public health issues as well. Trees, green space, car dependency. This is the important public health aspects we need to consider in our city and you know, our environment. It's been good to see residents come out around this issue and join together to try to fix the planning process that we're seeing. And we really need you if we're going to, you know, build a better Civic Hospital and a better city. And so throughout tonight, we'll have some of the dates, important deadlines that are coming up. So thank you for coming out, and thank you to Joel for hosting this and inviting. I think I saw Councillor Riley Brockington come online as well, Councillor McKenney, and I know Councillor Cooper wants to be here as well, but there's more to come. So thank you for inviting our council colleagues, and appreciate you hosting this, Joel.
It's an absolute pleasure, Sean. So you did my work for me there, Sean. I wanted to then just introduce Riley Brockington, Councillor for River Ward. Riley, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Joel, and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Joel, for the invite, and a pleasure to be with you and our fellow neighbors. I am here to listen tonight. This has been a long journey, certainly a long journey over many years and many terms of council, where the city has been engaged in a discussion about the need for a new hospital. I don't think anyone disagrees that the Civic Hospital has passed its best before date and a new hospital needs to be built. But certainly one of the main questions is, where should that hospital go? What council has coming up is the master site plan, which looks at basically how that gets built and all the intricacies that feed into the hospital. So while the location has had rightly a lot of debate recently and not so recently, it's been quite the journey. There are many other issues that local councillors and council as a whole will be engaged in come October. So Joel, you and I have talked about this for quite some time as well, and appreciate your continued engagement, active engagement, but I'm here to listen, and like my colleagues will be taking notes. There's a lot of stuff that still needs to be ironed out and addressed, and this is a public hospital paid with public dollars, and the public deserves answers to questions, thorough answers to your questions. So like Catherine and Sean and Joel said, I'm here to listen, and I want to help move this forward with the public as well. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Riley, it's a pleasure to have you here. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. All right, so we are now thankfully going to be edified by one of our neighbors with experience in building good architecture. So Tone Dressen, as I mentioned before, is leading architect in our city, past president of the Ontario Association of Architects. And Tone's pulled together a slide deck for us to kind of understand what we know so far, given the development that's been announced to date and some of the concerns that he has from a design perspective, from an architectural perspective. Tone, hey. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate it. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to flip up my screen here and take it away. One brief moment. Uh-oh. All right, let's try that again. There we go.
Here we are.
Okay, so my name is Tone Dressen. I'm an architect, past president of the Ontario Association of Architects, active on Twitter, often about procurement, and crankiness if I'm not sharing pictures of my granddaughters. So I'm very honored and pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So I was interested in the site, during the consultations, and then when the announcement was made, and they, said we recommend Tiny's Pasture, and then I think it was the next day they said, oh, good, thanks for the recommendation. We're going to go put it someplace else. I was really astonished and kind of perplexed at how that decision could happen. So I wrote about it, and I've blogged about it, and I've written about it, and I've tried to continue remaining engaged because I'm really concerned for all the reasons that have been stated, and continuously want to continue to be involved and to help. So just in background, the NCC had assessed 12 different sites. They had 21 different criteria, including functional needs, urban location, proximity to amenities, site services, access to major roads, highways, air ambulances, its impact on capital green spaces, recreational paths, soil conditions, municipal infrastructure. There was this whole list of criteria, and the NCC did, I think, a really good job. A lot of people bash the NCC for things, but I think the NCC did a really good job in this consultation and really objectively looked at sites, and they made a recommendation. So they made this recommendation, and what they suggested was the Tiny's Pasture location. And in a nutshell, this was chosen because it was flat, it's geologically stable, much of the land is occupied by surface parking lots or other physical infrastructure or buildings that are beyond their currently useful life, needing massive reinvestment. It has good access to natural views, that promote health and well-being. Its connection to a major highway isn't fantastic, as anyone who lives in, off of Parkdale in that area knows. Its connection to a highway is not fantastic, but I would argue that the current site is not any better and possibly even worse. It does have access to Scott Street and the Ottawa River Parkway, so it does have access to good road networks in that respect. It's also, obviously it's the site of where we've just spent we taxpayers have spent several $billion on an LRT system, so it's already well served by transit, and for decades has been a hub for bus transit. So there's already established connections and networks. It's also worth noting this is a 20-hectare site, so it's a quarter larger than the current site that's been selected. The site that was selected was the Dow's Lake site. It's 16 hectares. It's geologically challenging. It's on the edge of a World UNESCO Heritage Site. It's not well served by transit in its current form, and the cost increases to make those connections to transit is pretty significant. We're going to either add massive costs to the hospital to make that connection, or we're going to add massive costs to an existing contract that's in place for the LRT, or the city is going to pay out of its pocket to make those connections. So somewhere along the way, we're going to have a massive cost to do that. And it's poorly connected to roads and highways. Preston Street is a traditional main street. It's not well served. There's no good on-ramps, off-ramps. It's Rochester. It's not well served. And sure, Carling is great, and maybe Prince of Wales is okay, but it's not like we want these to become major arteries, and Carling should be redeveloped as well. So, there's pros and cons there. So it's important, just as we go through the next few slides, just to keep those figures in mind. 16 hectares, 640 beds, and over 2,500 parking spaces in an above ground parking garage. And for sense of scale, that parking garage is about the size of the parking garage at the Ottawa airport. So it's a pretty massive site. So the existing Civic Hospital site is in itself significant for a number of other reasons. It's in total about 9.5 hectares with many buildings, many surface parking lots, above grade parking garages, and plans for this site after a new facility is built include rehabilitation and long-term care. So it's important to note this because it's not that the new hospital is going to be built and then the existing Civic site is going to be demolished and turned into a park or turned into housing. It's going to continue to have an institutional use. And we have to think about that with respect to the preferred site at Tiny's Pasture, which is part of the Canada Lands Corporation redevelopment strategy for mixed use development, intending to bring new housing, park, open space, and reimagined federal office space to Tiny's Pasture. And so those laudable goals are absolutely compatible with a moderately dense new Civic Hospital site that could also accommodate housing and offices and a research campus and other key elements of a well-designed city. So in all of this context about Dow's Lake and the site, it's a hard site in my head to get a picture of. When somebody says to me 16 hectares, what does that really mean? So I've spent some time trying to puzzle out what that really means, and picture that. So this is the current St. Paul's Hospital in Vancouver. It's a 550 bed hospital and it occupies that block. So, it's not dissimilar in size to what, in terms of number of beds that our new hospital would have, but it occupies a much smaller footprint, and it's quite small. The new St. Paul's Hospital is being built, and it's one of the largest parcels of undeveloped land in Vancouver. It's a 7.5 hectare site, so about half the area that we're looking at for our new Civic Hospital site. And what's interesting is that it's a 548 bed hospital, and it also on the site is going to accommodate institutional uses, offices, a hotel, retail services, an Indigenous cultural center, and rental housing for healthcare workers. And the buildings are going to range from 24 to 61 meters in height. The hospital itself is 11 stories and sits on top of a 4-story underground parking garage. So we could build an 11-story hospital on a much smaller site with a 4-story underground parking garage for about 1,200 cars in a much smaller footprint and be fine. Staying in Vancouver very briefly, anyone who's been to a game at BC Place Stadium, this is the size of BC Place Stadium compared to the size of our Civic Hospital site, just for a sense of scale and context. Bridgepoint Active Healthcare in Toronto was built just a few years ago. It's a 10-story, 404-bed hospital. It's on the north side of Gerrard Street, and it's bounded by Broadview Avenue and parks. The site area is about 4.25 hectares. And so as an example of scale, this is about half the site of our entire new Civic Hospital site, and a not dissimilar 2/3 of the number of beds. And incidentally, was also a P3 project that won a Governor General's Award in architecture and was beautifully designed and conserved the heritage, some of the heritage buildings of the former Don Valley Jail that was there. Staying in Toronto, the Humber River Hospital is a purpose-built 722-bed hospital that stretches across 14 levels with 2 stories of underground parking. So again, a much bigger hospital, a much more intense use of the site and land on a much smaller site. Interestingly, in Montreal, the McGill University Health Center, the Glen site, it's almost 1,400 beds. So, twice the size of what we're proposing, nearly 3 times the size of what we're proposing. It's in the heart of Montreal and probably one of the most congested Hot Wheel tracks designed, inspired highway systems. And it's obviously on a smaller site. So, this is a massive hospital, almost 1,400 beds is enormous, and it manages to fit on a smaller site. What's interesting, and people talk about parking and how parking revenues drive hospitals and help fund things. The McGill University Health Center, parking is free for the first 2 hours, and it caps at $10 a day. So this idea that we have to have parking revenue to help support the hospital is really just a pile of twaddle. We all know how dense New York is, New York City. So there are 2 hospitals on this site, and they provide nearly 1,000 beds on that site. Staying in New York, because everybody loves New York, Governor's Island is, an island between Brooklyn and Manhattan, and it's like half the size of our entire site. So this is like a sense of scale of how big this is. Briefly going over to Europe, if you've been to Paris, if you've wandered the streets of Paris, this is Hotel Dieu in Paris, 330 beds, tiny footprint of a site, middle of a heritage, beautiful city, walkable streets. If you've been here and you've seen this kind of density, you know how dense this kind of community could be. And this is what 16 hectares would cover. Staying in France, if you've been to the Mont Saint-Michel, it's a medieval monastery, a kilometer off the northwest coast of France with 60 buildings, a World UNESCO Heritage Site, and our hospital site would completely obliterate the entire footprint of that. This is the ancient walled city of Lucca, and this is the ancient part right in the middle, and you can see how massive the scale of our site is in comparison. Florence, Italy, the Duomo and the Basilica and the Campanile, the heart of the Renaissance. This would completely obliterate that entire site and how much of space that would take up. And staying in the land of fun, Disneyland. Everybody loves Disneyland. The site of the new hospital area is equal to all of Main Street, USA, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland in this total area, the original, half the area of the total original Disney theme park. Staying in the theme of fun parks and places, Ontario Place that the Ford government has decided to privatize. This is Ontario Place. You get a sense of the scale of how big this site could be. And then just for fun, we went over to Egypt. And this is the Grand Pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Khufu. And you can see how massive the pyramid is. You can picture how big that is. And it is, not even half the size of the site. So this is just to get a sense of that sort of scale of how much land we're talking about, and that all we're doing with it is putting on a hospital and a parking garage. And I think that's really unfortunate that we're making such an inefficient use of the land that's in front of us. So the other piece I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I've mentioned this a few times on Twitter when people circulate images of the site, is the procurement model. So it's important to see, it's important to realize that what we're seeing in images isn't necessarily what we're going to get. Hospitals in Ontario are delivered by Infrastructure Ontario through a public-private partnership. They all use a model of either a design, build, finance, maintain, or a build and finance, or a design, build, and finance model. So what's consistent amongst all of these is that somebody will bid on the job to at the very least build and finance this project. And I'll talk a little bit more about financing and how that works. If you're really interested in P3s and my opinion of them, you can follow me on Twitter. There's a blog that I wrote about P3s, and there's lots of links and articles and things in them as well. And to be clear, I think P3s do have some place, just not really in buildings or transit. And we've all had the joy of the Ottawa LRT. So, these images that we're seeing, so what's going to happen is these images and some drawings get prepared by a firm. These are done by HDR, and they get prepared, and then they get essentially thrown over the fence, and a consortium design build team will bid on this project, and they will finance the project, and they will hire all the consultants. And in the process of doing so, they will meet this exemplar design. So they will try to meet what's in here, and they will do so by meeting the contract language requirements of that project. And they will do everything in their power to maximize their profit in doing so. So those contracts are so dense and so complicated that unless you really get into it, and most people don't and can't, if something is not written in the contract, if something isn't there, well, then it's an extra. And we have our own experiences of that with our LRT. You want an extra, staircase? Well, that's extra. You want more heating? That's extra. All these things become extras. So it really takes an art and a science and an accounting exercise to find a way to make improvements. And so somebody will bid this, they will try to achieve this, and in the process, we'll have almost no discussions with the end user, with the public, because the design team isn't hired, as a public entity. They're hired through a private contracting company. So the common result when people finish a P3 is we got a building, but it's not necessarily the one we wanted. So there's a couple of really good articles, and they're linked in that blog. And this one dates back to Barry McKenna's article from 2012, I think. So there's a couple of points in this that I want to reference. So governments, this is what Barry McKenna said, governments insist that they're leveraging greater value by generating efficiencies and offloading risk to the private sector. P3s theoretically deliver more projects on time and on budget, but at what price? Disturbing new research highlights how serious flaws in governments tally the benefits of P3s versus conventional projects. So these deals are politically seductive. Governments like them because they push spending down the road. And this was argued by Aidan Vinning of Simon Fraser University. And they did an analysis with Anthony Boardman that taxpayers are too often getting a raw deal. And it's essentially like leasing a car or TV rather than paying cash up front. At the end of the day, governments pay substantially more, but if something goes wrong, someone else is responsible, in theory. So governments are essentially renting money that they could borrow more cheaply on their own because it's expedient to defer expenses. The cost of public-private partnerships costs an average of 16% more than a conventionally tendered project. And the math that's involved in achieving that is a bit of accounting hocus pocus, because the Auditor General in Ontario has even pointed this out, that there is absolutely no empirical evidence that's provided to substantiate that risk allocations make it difficult to assess their accuracy and validity. Then there's Alex Bozakovic, who wrote a review of P3 projects in Vancouver and determined that, what you get is a mediocre building. So the other part of this is near and dear to my heart, which is about who gets to do this work. So in Ontario in the last, decade or so, we've built about $17 billion worth of hospitals. 82% of that money, 82% of the work has been built with 2 firms involved. And actually those 2 firms have directly built 76% of the hospitals. Meanwhile, 12 firms share the remaining 24%. So really, we've essentially sole sourced the design and construction of hospitals in Ontario to 2 firms. And these projects are absolutely enormous. And because we've essentially sole sourced this, most of those other smaller firms, they don't bid and they don't bother. And don't get me wrong, hospital design is it's not my forte. I couldn't design a hospital. There's lots of people who can. It is very, very specialized. You have to be very good at it. But the more concentrated this becomes, the fewer firms participate in this process, and the less likely it is that anyone else will ever learn how to do this. So the firms that are doing this hospital work are now enormous, massive, often international architecture engineering firms. They're conglomerates from around the world with specialists. So there's a lot of these jobs are not even being done. Sometimes they're being done in Ontario, sometimes they're not. The specialists that are being engaged, and it's really, really expensive. A friend of mine who I actually found out today passed away just recently. He used to be involved in the design of these projects, and in bidding, just in even putting together a bid, it would cost his firm over $1 million just to put together a bid. And if they lost, well, that was $1 million out of their pocket. So they were incentivized to put in the next bid even lower because they had to make up their losses from the last one. So this constant race to the bottom ends up feeling like there's minimum quantities, minimum quality, minimum requirements, and we're all designing to the minimum letter of that contract. And that's really frustrating when we're talking about something like a hospital, because we have these absolutely critical issues, right? We have critical issues, and to me, the number one issue is climate change. And in this particular case, it's siting and procurement. We really have to be cognizant, I think, at the same time, and recognize the challenges and be realistic about what we can and we cannot change. We could, for example, demand that the hospital be a net zero building or a zero carbon building. That is enormously challenging for a hospital that has enormous energy requirements. We can demand that the building be energy efficient, but there's always going to be pushback on that. Can we ask for a better approach? Sure. Can we ask for no parking? Probably not. The other part of this is that we have to be conscious of what happened in the site selection itself, and what happens if we push back hard enough and they reopen the door about new site selection. And if we have a change in government, we have a change in federal government, a change in provincial government, we could end up with a worse site, and that would be more horrible, and we would go from the frying pan into the fire, and that's really challenging. So, as well is Infrastructure Ontario likely to change their procurement model? Really unlikely. They are married to this, as is the Conservative government, as was the Liberal government before them. So unless we have a Premier Horwath and Minister Hardin coming in the near future, the likelihood that we're going to see a termination of P3s in the province is pretty slim. So, even though we have better procurement models like the FCM decision-making guide, we really have to think about what our realistic asks might be. And so to do that, we really need to raise our voice, and forums like this are essential for that. We need political leadership, because architecture is politics. Stephen Mandel, when mayor of Edmonton, when he said our tolerance for crap is zero, we have to have political leadership that absolutely says that we need to have better, we need to have change. Voting obviously is critically important, and we have to advocate for ourselves. the broad discipline that includes urban design, planning, sustainability, and other fields today that were traditionally led by architects. We've known since 1951 that the power of architecture, the power of the built environment to enliven and enrich lives still exists. So we have a voice within ourselves to make that difference and make that change. So I encourage everyone to continue doing so. Thank you.